History tends to shine its spotlight on a single heroic figure, the one whose name ends up carved into monuments and printed in textbooks. But behind every celebrated leader, there are rougher, grittier individuals who never get the fame they deserve. For every George Washington, there was a Daniel Morgan. For every Abraham Lincoln, a Cassius Clay. And for the United States Navy, the man standing in the shadows of history is John Paul Jones. Most people know that America relied heavily on unconventional tactics during the Revolutionary War. What's talked about far less is that while land commanders like Daniel Morgan, Andrew Pickens and Francis Marion were fighting guerrilla battles across the colonies, John Paul Jones was pioneering guerrilla warfare at sea, striking British ships, raiding coastal towns, and becoming the first American in more than a century to attack Great Britain on its own soil. He raised the first American flag aboard the Navy's first commissioned warship, the USS Alfred. He was present for the Marine Corps' first amphibious landing. He captured the first British warship in American history, and he was one of the last Revolutionary War heroes to be brought home and laid to rest with honour. John Paul was born in 1747 on the Abergland estate in Scotland. His father was the head gardener, which placed the family in a strange social position, technically servants, yet living among aristocrats. This gave John Paul an unusual upbringing. He learned to read, write, speak, and behave like the wealthy elite. But no matter how polished he became, society still saw him as the gardener's son. He realized early that he'd never escape that label unless he changed his destiny. The clearest path upward was the sea. Ship captains, called masters, were respected gentlemen. So at age 13 he apprenticed aboard the merchant ship Friendship, learning every skill he could for 4 years until the ship was sold and he was left unemployed. He took the first job he could find, working aboard a slave ship. He hated it, later calling the trade abominable, and eventually quit mid-voyage in Jamaica. Stranded, he searched for work and found passage on a brig commanded by Captain Samuel McAdams. During the return trip, both the captain and first mate died of yellow fever, the only 2 men who knew how to navigate. The crew was helpless, except for John Paul. At just 20 years old, he took command, navigated the ship across the Atlantic, and delivered it safely to Britain. The ship's owner was so impressed that he made John Paul the new captain. For the next several years, he captained voyages across the Atlantic, but many older sailors resented taking orders from a young man of humble birth. Tensions peaked when a crewman named Maxwell tried to start a mutiny. John Paul had him flogged, standard punishment at the time, and Maxwell quit the ship. When Maxwell later died of yellow fever on another vessel, his wealthy family accused John Paul of murder. He spent months gathering proof of his innocence and was legally cleared, but his reputation suffered. 2 years later, another sailor attacked him with a club. John Paul killed him in self-defense, but fearing he wouldn't get a fair trial, he fled to America in 1773. He adopted the name John Paul Jones and lived quietly in Virginia with his brother. He spent his days reading, writing, and trying to accept that his life's plan had collapsed. Then the American Revolution began. Joining the Navy of a new nation. In 1775, Jones traveled to Philadelphia and volunteered for the brand new United States Navy. Experienced sailors were rare. Most preferred privateering, which paid far better. So Jones was commissioned as a lieutenant aboard the USS Alfred, the Navy's first warship. He became the first man to raise the Grand Union flag, the earliest version of the American flag. He drilled his crew relentlessly, preparing them for real combat, despite shortages of gunpowder and cannons. In 1776, the Navy launched its first offensive mission, an attack on New Providence in the Bahamas to seize British military supplies. Jones proposed an amphibious landing rather than a direct naval assault. The plan worked perfectly. Marines and sailors captured the city, seized cannons, gunpowder, uniforms and supplies, and returned home victorious. Jones was promoted to captain and given command of the USS Providence. Jones slipped through a British blockade at night and began a campaign of naval guerrilla warfare, capturing British merchant ships outsmarting British warships, raiding Nova Scotia's fishing fleets, destroying and commandeering vessels, capturing a massive British transport ship carrying 10,000 winter uniforms. Those uniforms later kept American soldiers alive at Valley Forge and were worn during Washington's famous crossing of the Delaware. He captured 16 merchant ships, outmaneuvered multiple British warships, and even mocked one captain by firing a single musket shot after an 8-hour chase, a sarcastic compliment on the British captain's terrible aim. Jones raided Nova Scotia's fishing villages, burned ships, seized others, and returned to America with 5 captured vessels. Congress rewarded him with command of the USS Alfred, giving him a small fleet. But he was still short-handed. Privateering paid far better than Navy service, so Jones recruited Nova Scotians to help crew his captured ships. Jones received orders to sail to a coal mine in Nova Scotia, where American prisoners were being held. On the way, he captured a massive British transport ship carrying winter uniforms. But the Providence was falling apart. The crew was exhausted, the ship was leaking, and morale was collapsing. Jones tried to rally them, but the crew mutinied, turned the ship around, and fled in the night. Jones continued with the rest of his fleet, only to discover that the prisoners he was supposed to rescue had switched sides and were now working for the British, just as Nova Scotians were now working for him. Worse, 2 British warships were closing in. Jones devised a clever escape. He loaded one captured ship entirely with Nova Scotians, hung a lantern on it, and sent it sailing in a different direction. The British chased the decoy all night while Jones slipped away in darkness. He returned to America with captured ships and thousands of uniforms, a mission technically failed but strategically invaluable. Jones was given the smaller USS Ranger and sent to France. After being denied a larger warship, he received simple orders: distress the enemy. He did exactly that. The raid on Whitehaven. Jones launched a daring nighttime raid on the British port of Whitehaven, the first attack on Britain in over 100 years. His plan to burn the entire harbour was foiled by rain and drunken sailors, but he disabled the fort's cannons and caused widespread panic. The next day, Jones raided the estate of the Earl of Selkirk. His crew wanted to loot everything, but Jones insisted they take only the family's silver plate, a psychological tactic meant to shock British nobility. He later wrote a polite apology to Lady Selkirk and promised to return the plate. Jones disguised the Ranger as a merchant ship, lured the British warship HMS Drake close, revealed his identity, and captured the ship after a fierce battle. He became the first American to capture a British warship. In 1779, Jones finally received a larger ship, the bonhomme Richard, and a small fleet. He soon encountered a massive British convoy protected by the powerful HMS Serapis. The Serapis outclassed Jones in every way. Jones didn't care. He lashed his slower ship directly to the Serapis, turning the battle into brutal close-quarters combat. When asked to surrender, he famously replied, "I have not yet begun to fight." After hours of combat, Jones captured the Serapis and sailed it to safety as the bonhomme Richard sank behind him. It was one of the most legendary naval battles in American history. After the war, Jones served in the Russian Navy under Catherine the Great, winning battles but losing credit due to politics and British interference. He retired to Paris and died in 1792, buried in obscurity. More than a century later, his remains were rediscovered and returned to the United States with honor. Today, he rests at the US Naval Academy, a hero finally recognized. John Paul Jones is remembered as the father of the US Navy, the first American to raise a naval flag, the first to attack Britain in a century, the first to capture a British warship, a master of naval guerrilla warfare, a man who refused to surrender, no matter the odds. His legacy is one of courage, defiance, and relentless determination, the spirit of a nation fighting for its place in the world. Thank you so much for watching, and if you would like to help the channel grow, just hit the subscription button and the notification bell. Thank you so much.